Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with The Bad Seed. 5. Toward the end of the week, Mrs. Breedlove telephoned and said, "I'm truly ashamed of myself for neglecting Rhoda's locket the way I have. I must go to town this morning, and this will be the good time to get it fixed. If you'll ask Rhoda for it, I'll pick it up on my way out." Her daughter, Christine said, was playing under the Kunkel's big Scuppernong arbor, but she was confident she could find the locket without help. Rhoda kept her most valued possessions in a Swiss chocolate tin on the top of her dresser drawer, and the locket should be there too. The locket was where she thought it would be, and returning the box to its original place, Mrs. Penmark felt something flat and metallic under the oilcloth that covered the drawer. She outlined the object with her forefinger, wondering what it could be, and then, lifting the covering in sudden intuitive panic, she found the lost penmanship medal. For an instant, the occurrence had little meaning for her, her mind refusing to accept the implication of its discovery. It seemed merely part of a thing she had read once in a book, a thing with neither value nor application for herself. Then, as the inevitable significance of the discovery of the medal in this particular place came to her, she returned it to its place under the oilcloth, with her palms pressed against her cheeks, and stood perplexed in the room. Everything she told me about the medal is a lie, she thought. Everything. She had it all the time. She walked to the window and stood there, hearing the voices of her daughter and the Kunkel children raised in the shrillness across the street. A sense of petulant sadness came over her, a feeling that she was being most unjustly treated, was being wrongfully punished for the thing she had not done. What was the matter with Rhoda anyway? Why couldn't she behave like the other girls her age? What was the basis of her strange, unsocial conduct? She looked back, reviewing the little girl's life from the beginning, in an effort to see how she had gone wrong in training her affection, to find the mistakes she had made. For it was plain now that she had made many mistakes, eager to blame herself in this moment of self-abasement for any omission, any error in judgment, no matter how tiny, no matter how innocently done, but she could not find anything of any, but she could find nothing of any true importance. She was still standing there by the window, undecided as to what she would do now, her hands opening and closing in little spasms of anxiety and doubt, when Monica rang the bell. At once she opened the door and gave Monica the locket. Monica was in one of her more jovial moods. She talked about the locket that the memories had held for her, as she thought she were on the couch of Dr. Kettlebaum and associated freely for him. Christine smiled, listened, and nodded, but her mind took in little what was said. She thought, Rhoda has been given love and security from the beginning. She was never neglected, and she was never spoiled. She was never unjustly treated. Kenneth and I always made it a point to see how she felt important to us and wanted. I don't understand her mind or character. I don't understand it. Mrs. Breedlove said, "My own monogram was never on the locket, but I think I'll have Rhoda's engraved on the reverse side if you're agreeable." "Whatever the trouble is," thought Christine, nodding and saying absently, "Yes, yes, of course," and then turning and resting her forehead against the panel of the door. "I don't believe environment had much to do with it. It must be something deeper than that." She sighed, raised her head, and looked at Mrs. Breedlove once more, thinking it was something dark and unexplainable. "Has Rhoda a middle initial?" said Monica gaily. "It's odd, but I've never inquired about it before." Christine came back to reality and said the child's full name was Rhoda Howe Penmark. She had been named for Kenneth's mother, a formal woman of unbridled respectability. The elder Mrs. Penmark had opposed her son's marriage into the Bravo family with considerable heat. They were, she said, a family of international vagabonds who had never taken root anywhere. They were descendant Bohemians, or at least Richard Bravo, the father, seemed to be. If one could judge from his writings, it was only fair to assume his family would be like him, forever taking issue with the fundamental and established order of things, The things more stable people reversed and perpetuated from generation to generation. She had predicted the direct consequences if her son persisted in this mad folly. This would be a record, put on record that she at least had seen clearly and had done her duty. He had warned him in advance, no matter how painful the issue of the warning had been to her. No matter how deeply her forced disprobation had hurt her mother's heart, Rhoda had been named for her jealous old lady as a sop to her vanity, in an effort to win her tolerance and goodwill, an effort which was never been entirely successful. Monica took the locket, dropped it in her bag, and said, "Oh, that New England type, I know it so well, my dear." When she had gone, Christine sat by a window that overlooked the park, her forefinger absently moving along the arm of her chair. She thought about her child and wondered what course she must be taking now. Then all at once she had a sense of wary familiarity, as though she had been over these things before and had to go somewhere, just as she would get nowhere this time again too. Again she felt self-pity. Her husband had never said so, but she knew the death of the old woman in Baltimore and the subsequent expulsion of the child for theft from progressive school had been the true reasons he'd asked for a transfer from his position there to this in a lesser position where he would be among complete strangers. But when she had pitied herself enough, when she had exhausted the possibilities of how unjustly she was treated, when compared with happier women whose children were ordinary and predictable, but sense of proportion returned to her, and with it, hope and something of her good nature. She would no longer jump to unsupported conclusions. Perhaps Rhoda had been truthful and logical explanation for having the penmanship medal. Perhaps she had been too frightened to admit its possession, with the foreigners badgering her in a body and asking for all those she shaped pointed questions. At least she had not lied this time, except indirectly, of course, for nobody, so far as she knew, had thought to ask if she had the medal for herself or knew where it was. She washed her face in cold water, put on her lipstick, and sat for 10 minutes to compose herself. Then, crossing the street, she went to the Kunkel's backyard and told Rhoda to come with her. When they were home again, she got the medal from its hiding place and put it on the table before them. Rhoda's eyes opened wide in alarm, and then glancing from side to side, she closed them wearily. "How did the penmanship medal happen to be in your desk drawer?" said Christine. "Tell me the truth, Rhoda." Rhoda took off one of her shoes, examined it slowly, and put it on again, but did not answer at once. Then, smiling a little, dancing away from her mother in a gesture which others had always found so charming, she said to gain time, "When we move to our new house, Mother, can we have a scuppernong or two? Can we, Mother?" "Answer my question, Rhoda. Remember, I'm not as innocent about what went on at the picnic as you think. Miss Octavia Fern has told me a great deal when I went to see her, so please don't make up a story for my benefit this time." But the child remained silent, her mind working, waiting shrewdly for her mother to continue talking and betray an answer she expected. But Christine, as though aware of her child's intention, had repelled by her calculated but clumsy efforts at evasion, only said, "How did Claude Daigles' medal get in your dresser drawer? It certainly didn't get there by itself. I'm waiting for your answer, Rhoda." She got up from her chair and walked from the room, a sense of anger suddenly burning up in her. The child should be thoroughly spanked, she felt. She'd never been spanked in her life, and perhaps that was the real trouble with her now. She thought she should be thoroughly and officially spanked. She should be taught, without further delay, a lesson in kindness and consideration for other people. But her anger died quickly, and she knew she could never bring herself to hurt her child, no matter what she'd done. Perhaps Rhoda knew that too. Perhaps it was really the strength of her polite, unyielding stubbornness. I don't know how the medal got there, Mother, said Rhoda, her eyes wide with innocence. How should I know how the medal got there? You know quite well how it got there. She seated herself again and continued in a softer voice. She said, the first thing I want you to know is this. How did you did you go to the wharf at any time at all during the picnic? Yes, Mother, said the child hesitantly. I went there once. Was it before or after you were bothering Claude? I didn't bother Claude, Mother. What makes you think that? When did you go out on the wharf, Rhoda? It was early, when we first got there. You knew you were forbidden to go on the board, didn't you? Why did you do that? One of the big boys said there were little shells that grew on the pilings. I didn't believe that shells grew on wood, and I wanted to see if they did or not. Christine nodded and said, I'm glad you admit to being on the wharf at least. Miss Fern told me that one of the guards saw you coming off the wharf. He said it was much later than you claimed, though. He said it wasn't long before lunchtime. He's wrong, though. I told Miss Fern that, too. It happened like I said it did. Then, as feeling though she won the initial point, she said, the man hollered at me and told me to come off. And that's what he said. I went back to the lawn, and that's when I saw Claude. But I wasn't bothering Claude. I was just talking to him. What did you say to Claude? I said that if I didn't win the gold, I was glad he won it. So Claude said I was sure to win it next year, as the medal wasn't ever given twice to the same pupil. Christine shook her head wearily. Please, Rhoda, this isn't a game. I want the truth. But it's all true, Mother, Rhoda said earnestly. Every word I tell you is true. Christine was silent for a short time, and then she said, Miss Fern told me that one of the monitors who saw you try to take the medal off Claude's shirt. Did the girl really see what she said she did? That big girl was Mary Beth Musgrove, said Rhoda. She told everybody she saw me. Even Leroy Jessup knows she saw me. She paused and went on, her bright eyes opened wide, as though complete candor were now the only course up to her. Claude and I were playing a game we made up. He said if I could catch him in 10 minutes and touch the medal with my hand, it was like prisoner's base or something. He'd let me wear the medal for an hour. How can Mary Beth say I took the medal? I didn't. Mary Beth didn't say you took the medal. She said you grabbed at it and tried to take it. She said Claude ran down the beach when she called to you. Did you have the medal even then? No, Mother, not then. She was becoming more sure of herself under the questioning and convinced at last her mother knew little or nothing at all, or came to her, put her arms around her neck and kissed her cheek with such ardor that her mother was now a passive, patient one. At last Christine said, How'd you get the medal, Rhoda? Oh, I got it later on. I want to know how you got possession of the medal, Rhoda. Well, Claude went back on his promise, said Rhoda. I followed him out to the beach. And he stopped and said I could wear the medal all day if I gave him 50 cents you gave me for spending money. Is that true, my darling? Is that really true? Rhoda said, a slight content in her voice at her easy victory. Yes, Mother, that's just what happened. I gave him the 50 cents and he let me wear the medal. But if you paid him to wear the medal, why didn't you tell Miss Fern this when she questioned you? Why did you keep quiet all this time? The child began to whimper, to glance around with a simulated apprehension. Miss Fern doesn't like me at all. She really doesn't. I was afraid she'd think bad things about me if I told her I had the medal. She rushed to her mother, embraced her, and rested her head against her shoulder, cutting up her eyes expectantly as though waiting for some cue. You knew how much Mrs. Daigles wanted the medal, didn't you? You knew she paid those men to go down the water and look for it. We discussed it once before. You knew she held the funeral up, hoping the medal would be found in time so that Claude could be buried with it. You knew all those things, didn't you, Rhoda? Yes, Mother, I guess I did. If you knew how anxious she was to find the medal, why don't you give it to her? If you're afraid to take it back, I would have done it for you. The child said nothing. She looked merely placated. She made placating noises in her throat. She stroked her mother's neck softly. Christine waited, closed her eyes, and said, Mrs. Daigles is heartbroken over Claude's death. It's almost destroyed her. I don't think she'll ever recover from it, at least not completely. She disengaged her child's arms and holding her away from her, she said, "Do you understand what I'm talking about, Rhoda? Do you understand it at all, Rhoda?" "I suppose, Mother. Well, I guess so, Mother." But Christine sighed and thought, she doesn't understand at all. She hasn't had the least idea of what I mean. Rhoda shook her head and said stubbornly, "It was silly to want to bury the medal pinned on Claude's coat. Claude was dead, wasn't he? Claude wouldn't know whether he had the medal pinned on him or not." The child felt her mother's sudden and to her inexplicable disapproval, and then, as though to win back the grounded she had lost, she kissed her mother's cheek with little hungry kisses. "Oh, I've got the sweetest mother," she said. "I tell everybody I've got the sweetest mother in the world." Christine pulled away from her daughter and sat alone by the window looking at the tree-lined street. And then Rhoda, feeling her tested approach, which had always worked so well in the past when she wanted her way, had mysteriously failed this time, tilted her head sideways, and said, "If Claude's mother wants a little boy so bad, why doesn't she take one out of the orphan's home?" In a feeling of sudden revulsion, Christine pushed the child from her, a thing she had never done before, and said, "Please go away. Please don't talk to me anymore. We have nothing to say to each other." Rhoda shrugged and said patiently, "Well, okay, Mother." She sat at the piano and began working on the piece her teacher had given her a week before. She practiced with earnest concentration, her tongue sticking out over her teeth, and when she struck a wrong note, she sighed, shook her head in disapproval, and began practicing again. Christine, not long afterward, went back to preparing lunch. When she and her daughter had eaten and was putting away the last wash dish, she glanced out the window and saw Leroy in the courtyard below. He smirked, showing his strained, irregular teeth. Rolling his eyes in invitation, turned away. He had been out of sight drinking beer with his wife and still had a slight hangover. That trough-fed pink Christine Penmark, he thought, that dizzy blonde. That one didn't have enough sense to come around when it rained. That blonde was sure dumb. That dumb Christine let Rhoda put it on her this time. I went to the coolness of the basement, remembering the incident of the hose and the rude things Mr. Breedlove had said to him that day. He never got even with her for saying them things, but he would. Just wait and see. Her garage door was open and her car was gone. She must be down somewhere spending money and gabbing. He bet she wasn't eating no lunch wrapped up in a paper bag. He bet she was eating in one of them real nice places, throwing her weight around and going gab, gab, gab. His eyes wandering about the little room when he saw a big, discarded scraper standing in one corner. He laughed and suddenly, in pleasant anticipation of what was going to do, wheeled out the scraper and abandoned it in front of Mrs. Breedlove's garage. Then, as though that weren't enough, he set the buckets nearby and draped the mops over the scraper to give an air of informed credibility to the affair. He surveyed the work he had done, and when the artistic conscience was satisfied, he went to the basement, finished his lunch, and sat there clucking in anticipation and pleasure of what Mrs. Breedlove's face was going to look like when she had been out in the hot sun and moved the obsession before she put her hot car up. He had fixed a makeshift bed for himself in the basement. He had piled papers and Excelsior in one corner behind an old broken sofa, a place where none of the lieutenants could see him easily if they happened to peep inside. And often, when he was feeling like what he did right now, he would slip in there and take himself a little snooze without nobody being no wiser. He smoothed out the old quilt he had put over the papers in Excelsior, stretched out, sighed voluptuously, and let his mind wander. He wondered what that dizzy blonde did for her fun. and with her husband out of town so much. He'd like to have her with him right now if anybody asked him. He'd showed her some tricks all right. He was just the one to do it, what he was feeling right now. And when he got through with that dumb blonde, she wrote a letter to her husband telling him not to ever come back. He turned to her side, watching a fly walking across the ceiling. The dizzy blonde was a good-looking woman, all right. She made lots of them movie queens look sick, but she was too dumb for him, too soft and foolish-like. You could tame that one and break her down fast. You could have one eating out of your hand and begging for it all the time. That one was too much like his wife. But that mean little Rhoda was something else. You couldn't put nothing over that mean little girl. And when she grew up, she was going to be something. If a man tried to treat her sorry, just as likely as she not bounce a skillet off his head. He smiled with contentment, the voluptuousness of his fantasies flooding his sentence, turning slowly on his bed, and was instantly asleep. Mrs. Penmark sent Rhoda to the park to play, got out of the material she selected for the school's dresses, and started on the first one. She had cut it out and the material basted when Mrs. Breedlove stopped at her apartment on her way upstairs. She was tired from her trip to town and plainly angry. She was angry about something. She accepted this glass of She accepted the glass of iced tea Christine offered for her, sipped it, and said, "I'm not going to endure Leroy another day. He gets more impossible all the time. If it weren't for his poor wife and children, She broke off and shrugged and said, "But why go over these things again? You know them as well as I do. I'm not even going to discuss the matter." But she did, of course, and in the completest detail. When she had finished, she was in excellent humor once more, and laughing a little, tossing her head a while, she said, "Why delude myself any more, Christine? I enjoy screaming out Leroy, and I'm sure he knows it. There's a streak of fishwife in me, and Leroy's the only one who brings it out and ventilates it." She took off her hat and tossed on the sofa and said suddenly, "Rhoda's locket, that's what I'm really here for, not to tell you about Leroy Jessup." She went on to explain that she'd taken the locker to Paige's son, since she considered them the best jewelers in town, and talked with old Mr. Tajan himself, whom she known as long. Mrs. Pageant had listened to what she had said, had agreed to what she suggested. But he also said she couldn't get the locket for at least 2 weeks. That, if so soon, there'd be so much advance in the work of others. She had told Mr. Pageant in return that she'd really like counting on getting the locket someday. In fact, not 2 weeks later. In fact, that counting on getting it on the about 2 hours of the outside, but Mr. Pageant had shaken his frail head and said it was entirely out of the question, a complete physical impossibility. Christine smiled and said, "I can imagine what you said," and replied to poor Mr. Pageson. "Oh, I doubt it," she said with delight. "I doubt if even you, who know so intimately, dear Christine, I can guess how you handled the man this time." She thrust out her massive tubular legs and continued, "My approach was quite simple, and if I do say so, inspired. I merely said in my most reasonable voice, 'You mustn't forget, dear Mr. Pageant, that I'm running the community chest again this year, and I can't wait for the locket because I must hurry home, make out my estimate of the donations we expect from individuals and businesses. I'm glad I made the trip out to your store, for I know your business was doing so well. I would put you down for $1,000 in my mind, but of course, knowing what I do now, I'll be happy to revise the figure upward. Oh, so definitely upward." Monica, aren't you ashamed of yourself?" Not at all, screamed Mrs. Breedlove. Not in the slightest, my dear Christine. I think about 2,500 would be a fair donation from a growing concern like this one. I said, but of course I winked at him when I said it. He got the point all right. And when he said, you can put me down for any amount you like. I don't have to pay, There's no law that makes me contribute a penny to the community chest if I don't want to. Mrs. Breedlove put down her glass and touched eyes with the hem of her handkerchief. You think so, Mr. Page, then? I asked. You really think so? He said, not only do I think so, I know so. So I had to tell him how to deal with cases like this. We put her on our difficult extractions folder, and then our volunteers really went to work. I told him first we send down a bevy of last year's debutantes, girls who will do anything in the name of charity. They'll be instructed to weep on your corner and pull you loosen up, preferably while the store is full of customers. Of course, if that doesn't work, I'll have to call in old Miss Minnie Pringle, an expert at imploring if there ever was one. And when I mentioned Miss Minnie, I knew I had him on my ropes, my dear. She broke off to add that since Christine had never had the pleasure of meeting Miss Pringle, she had something to look forward to in the future. And Miss Minnie had a voice as piercing as the sharpest knife, as powerful, as monotonous as a foghorn. She had the sensitivity of a rhino's, the tenacity of a snapping turtle. Minnie was never actually the most terrifying old battle axe in town, even worse than Monica herself. I knew I had the old Mr. Pageson on the run, she continued, but threw me off, he said. Minnie Pringle won't bother me at all. I rather like the woman. We'll be glad to have her at the store at any time. So I grabbed him that Minnie's approach would be so stand just inside the front door and reminded him, of course, his customers, although he had flourishing business, the little gold mine of wealth, he owed it not to his own efforts, but to the tolerance of one on high. One on high had given him that tidy, prospering business, but one on high was equally prepared to smite him with lightning and blast him with thunder, to take all away from him. In fact, if he didn't accept his civic responsibilities and give the community chest its cut. Would you have done it? Asked Christine in astonishment. Of course not, my dear, said Mrs. Breedlove. If I did a thing like that, Emery would drown me in the bathtub. I had no idea of doing it. I was the only kidding poor Mrs. Pageson, but he wasn't sure I'd any more than you were. You see, I had a reputation of being an eccentric, a great advantage in dealing with others, I assure you. People are afraid of eccentrics. They can never be sure which way they'll jump or what they'll do next. So to end my tiresome story, said Mrs. Breedlove, I walked out of the store, saying over my shoulder, I've got some errands, but I'll be back at 12:30 on the dot. I have confidence that locket will be ready in time. Christine laughed and said, was the locket ready for you then? Oh, my dear, said Mrs. Breedlove. Oh, my dear, but now, Christine, of course it was ready. She opened her locket book and took out the locket. It had been cleaned. The clasps had been fixed. The stones had been changed. The letters R.H.P. was beautifully intertwined on the back. She gave the locket to Mrs. Penmark and continued to talk in a delighted voice. After she got things her way, her conscience trembled before about the way she blackmailed dear Mr. Pageson. Then she remembered he liked coconut pies more than anything, but he was the most particular about his coconut pies. He liked them made up from fresh coconut, not from tasteless, shriveled up stuff that came in boxes. He liked the milk of the coconut mixed with the custard, with the little morsels of fresh coconut distributed through the pie just before baking. He liked grated coconut on top of the pie and the pie crowned in a quick hot oven. He had told her all these few years ago how Mrs. Pageson before she died, had fixed pies for him the way exactly he liked them. But he'd not had a really good one since, for nobody in the generation of shortcuts and easily solution would go to all that trouble. Mrs. Breedlove opened her shopping bag and took out a big shaggy coconut. I stopped at Dimitrios at Fruitman, she said, and picked out the nicest one he had. I'm going upstairs in a minute and wake Mr. Payton, that dear man, a coconut pie the way he likes them. He may not know it, but it'll be far better than anything his wife has ever made, because his wife, in spite of everything she says, was an indifferent cook at best. Really, it will be the best pie he ever ate. I make the best pastry in town, and I know it. When Miss Breedlove had gone, Christine felt again the unhappiness she had known earlier that day. That evening, after dinner, she said to Rhoda, I've been thinking about the medal all day. I'm going to return to Mrs. Daigles, and I'm going to ask for forgiveness for having you stolen it. I didn't steal it, Mother. How can you say anything like that? Claude told me the medal like I told you. I don't know how you got the medal, said Christine wearily. But I do know you didn't get it the way you said you did. But even if you did run it from Claude, it was dishonest for you to keep it afterwards. The child looked at her steadily, her eyes filled with cold, shrewd calculation. A calculation she no longer tried to hide from her mother, since Christine knew so much. It's not Mrs. Daigles' medal, she said. Mrs. Daigles didn't win it. It belongs to me more than it does her. Christine did not answer the child's argument. She merely said, I won't be gone very long. I want you to stay here in the apartment until I get back. Do you understand? At first, she just considered taking the child with her to give her an object lesson in the sorrow of others. But she decided against it as both embarrassing and useless. And putting the medal in her purse, she went there, telling nobody of her intentions. Mr. Daigles received her at the door, but hesitantly now. There was a tense uneasiness about him, and he wavered in his intentions for a time long enough for Mrs. Penmark to feel and wonder about. And then, pressing his hands together, he asked her in the living room. Abruptly, he wheeled and went to tell the wife of his presence. At once, Christine heard Mrs. Daigles' metallic, hysterical voice in the room across the hall. Why is she coming here again? She said. Did you think to ask her? Hasn't she caused us enough heartbreak and sorrow without her coming here again to gloat all over us? She came to remind me that her child is well and happy, and that mine. Her voice rose almost to a wail, and her husband said in a small voice, Please, Hortense, please, she can hear you. Then let her hear me, said Mrs. Daigles. What difference does it make? Then in a softer voice she went, Tell her to go away. Tell her we don't care to see her, and she wants to go back home at once. Mr. Daigles came out of the room. He said apologetically, Hortense isn't herself these days. Perhaps you can understand. She resents anyone who's happier than she is, and God alone knows that's everyone who lives. She's been very unreasonable since Claude's death, and she's under her doctor's care. He came home this afternoon again. Then lowering his voice even more, he said, We're worried about her. Mrs. Penmark pressed his hand in understanding and moved toward the door. But at that moment, Mrs. Daigles burst into the room. Her eyes were red and swollen, and her hair hung in damp strings around her face, which seemed puffy and inflamed, as though she had been recently bitten by some poisonous insect. She took Christine's arm and said, Don't go now. Since you're here, you must stay. She wept noisily, her head pressed to her visitor's shoulder, and said, I'm glad you came. I enjoyed your last visit so much. I've spoken to you to my husband. If you doubt me, ask him, and he'll tell you who I have. It was pleasant of you to drop by again. I said I hope Mrs. Penmark would drop by again. Then, releasing her guest, she sat on her sofa and said, Come sit beside me, Christine. May I call you Christine? I'm quite sure that you come from a higher level of society than I do. I'm sure you made a debut and all that. Perhaps you won't mind this once. I was a beauty parlor operator now. I always considered Christine a gentle name. Hortense has such a fat sound, doesn't it? When I was a child, the other children used to sing a song they made up that went, "My girl Hortense hasn't got much sense. Let her, let's write her name on the privy fence." She sighed, wiped her eyes, and said, "You know how nasty children can be sometimes." "Hortense, Hortense," said Mr. Daigle. Then turning to Mrs. Penmark, he said, "Hortense isn't herself. She's under a doctor's care. You're so attractive, Christine. But of course, blondes do fade quickly. You have such exquisite taste in clothes, but I'm sure you got plenty of money to buy them with. When I was a young girl, I was always hoped I'd look at you, but of course I never did." She giggled at some obscure memory of her own and went on, "I went to see Miss Octavia Fern about little Claude's death, but she told me nothing I haven't read in the papers or heard on the radio. Oh, she's a sly one, that Octavia Fern. She made up her mind that she wasn't going to tell me anything. And you can be sure she didn't. She knows more than she tells, I think. There's something funny about the whole thing. And I've said over and over to Mr. Daigle. He married quite late, you know, in his 40s. But I wasn't exactly what the fellows call a spring chicken either. Please, Hortense, let me take you back to bed where you can rest." "There's something funny on this whole thing, Christine," she said knowingly. Then impulsively she turned to Mrs. Pembroke and said, "I heard your little girl was the last one to see him alive. Can you ask her about him and tell me what she says? Maybe she remembers some little thing. Oh, I don't care how small it is. Mrs. Octavia isn't going to tell me anything, and I've resigned myself to that. Miss Fern told you all she knows, Hortense. You must get the idea that she's your enemy out of your mind. Miss Fern despises me. She knows my father used to run a little fruit stand on St. Cecilia Street near the wharves." Then, seeing Christine was about to interrupt her, she put her damp palm against her visitor's lip and said amicably, "Oh, yes, she does. Don't apologize for her. I'm no fool. But that isn't the reason she despises me, because I was a beauty parlor operator before I married. She and her sister used to come to the shop where I worked. You know something, Mrs. Parmar? Miss Burgess dyes her hair. She'd be faint if she thought I told anybody that, but it's true. She dyes her hair all right." Mrs. Christine put her arm around the suffering woman, closed her eyes, and thought, "Don't let my emotions show now. Let me wait till I get home where nobody can see me." Mr. Daigle lit a cigarette and walked aimlessly up the stairs and down the room, straightening a vase, aligning a picture, brushing with his fingers the beadwork that hung like cobwebs from the dreadful lamps. "Hortense isn't herself, Mrs. Penmark," she said. "You must pardon her." Turning to his wife, he said, "If you'll go back to bed, Mrs. Penmark will sit by you and hold your hand for a while." Mrs. Daigle moved to her bedroom and said, Will you really, Christine?" And then, humbly, she said, "You can wear such simple things, and they look so well on you. I could never wear simple things. I never knew why. I know all the mothers say these things. Most people will laugh at them, but he was such a sweet child. He was such a lovely, dear little boy. He said I was a sweetheart. He said he was going to marry me when I grew up. I used to laugh and say, 'You'll forget about me long before then. You'll find a pretty girl when you grow up, and you'll marry her.'" Her voice was mounting again, and she went to her room with her husband and Mrs. Penmark supporting her. Got steadily louder. "And you know what he said then, Christine?" He said, "No, I won't, because there's not another girl in the whole world as pretty and sweet as you are. If you don't believe me, ask our cook. She was present at the time and heard it all and laughed with me when I said it." There were bruises on his hands and those particular crescent shape placed on his forehead that the undertaker tried to cover it up. "He must have bled before he died. That's what my doctor who saw him said. He said he must have bled some, but the water washed it away." Then turning and pressing her face with the pillow, she cried wildly, "What became of the penmanship medal? Where is it now? I have a right to know, so please don't try and stop me." And the little boy's mother, and if I knew what happened to that penmanship medal he won, I'd have a pretty good idea what happened to him. Why doesn't somebody find the medal and bring it to me? Then I know for sure. She sat up the side of her bed and said, I don't know why you took it upon yourself to come here unasked, Mrs. Penmark. But if you want to please me, you'll be gracious enough to leave. Hortense is not her cell, said Mrs. Daigle. Mrs. Daigle, brushing her limp, stringy hair out of her face, said, I'm impossible. I'm completely impossible. Miss Hortense is under a doctor's care, said Mrs. Daigle. When Christine returned home, the medal was still in her bag. Rhoda was sitting quietly in the lamplight reading her book. She saw the disturbed, unhappy impression on her mother's face. She felt unsuppressed censure, her disapprobation. She narrowed her eyes thoughtfully, wondering what mother had said to Mrs. Daigle, and what Mrs. Daigle in turn had said to her mother. She stood up, smiled, tilted her head back, and clapped her hands in a lovely little dish she picked up somewhere. If I give you a basket of kisses, what will you give me? But Christine did not answer Rhoda. And Rhoda, in sudden panic, danced eagerly to her mother. She put her arms around her mother's waist and said, What will you give me, Mother? What will you give me? Christine sat down suddenly, as though she was too weak to stand any longer, and took the child in her arms. She pressed her cheek against her daughter's cheek and said, oh, my darling, but did not answer the child's question. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.